Hello, this is Fiona Cuthbertson with another episode of So You Want To. According to government figures, around 1.6 million children and young people in England have identified special educational needs. That's roughly 15 to 16% of all pupils. And this week, we're looking to help those who want to learn about where online education fits in helping ensuring those children get the education they need. To help pave the way, we're joined by Paul Keenleyside, Executive Director of the Nisai Education Trust, Board Governor, Leadership and Performance Coach. He's a passionate advocate for inclusive education, and he's spent 30 years supporting some of the most vulnerable young children in our education system, those who, for whatever reason, struggle in conventional school environments. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you for having me on today, Fiona.
So first of all, can you tell me what is online learning and how does it differ from traditional in-person education?
As usual, Fiona, you've gone right to the nub of the question, right at the very beginning. So online education, the phrase itself covers so many different modalities that it's really quite difficult to summarize it from a one-to-one session with a child on something like Zoom all the way through to the giant MOOCs, which the universities in the States and in East Asia operate. For the purposes of this, I guess what we're looking at is what can be provided for children with SEND in terms of group or one-to-one work online rather than being in a physical school. I think the definition is really important because if we look at the numbers globally around access to online education, that does include face-to-face, if you like, on a Zoom or a Teams call, all the way through to what I call call and respond, which is where a child will complete work online, send it in, it'll be marked, and then it'll be sent back. So there's no contact or interaction at all. So the market's huge. There's a huge variety of different providers, huge variety of different approaches. The place that I'm working in at the moment and have done for a few years is about online virtual classrooms. That is to say, where young people are taught in groups online with perhaps extra support around it.
And why is online learning so important?
I think it's so important because the world around us is changing. And it's important because people are seeking to move out of the traditional structures of education, the bricks and mortar structures, if you like, the post-industrial structures that we're used to. And it's important because it's one of a number of mechanisms, one of a number of modalities that can potentially meet the needs of individual students and cohorts of students that previously either didn't exist, there's been a change in society, or have not been terribly well served by the system. So that's why it's important. It's another tool in the educator's armory, if you like. I don't see it as an either or. I see it as a alongside and with, if you like, more formal or traditional modes of education. And if we look at somewhere like, say, for instance, the Philippines, where schools tend to be rather larger than they are here. We have schools in the Philippines of 14,000, 20-odd thousand, far more sort of a franchise model. They will use online education as part of the general offer.
I was going to ask next, how effective is online learning compared to traditional classrooms?
The educator's answer to this is really complex in that we probably don't know. We're starting to get some really great research coming through. So the trust, we're fortunate enough to be the exec leader. We've got a knowledge transfer partnership with Staffordshire University, which is actually looking at this for the first time, using 7 years of data. So going back pre-pandemic. What we are starting to find is that there is efficacy for children and young people come to online learning with specific needs. Okay, so that's what we're starting to find, and that certain elements of the input are hyper impactful. So, for instance, we know that if you have a blended program, that is to say you have mentoring and you have online core curriculum, and you put those two together, then that young person at the end of key stage, when they're 16 or when they're 18, are almost 2 times more likely to go into a mainstream setting. The young people who may be very anxious, who may have social, emotional, mental health problems, who may have barriers to learning around autism or ADHD. Online learning, blended learning seems to be super powerful for them.
I said in my introduction that 15% of children have special educational needs. So, how do you think that online learning can be accessed by parents?
What we're seeing, coming back to that group, is that if your child is hyper anxious, if your child's not able to leave home, if they're at the point where they can't physically get themselves to school, or even with your help, then online learning is an option to reintegrate them back into society, to get them moving back into school or college or whatever. The way to do that, you are bound by the formal system at the moment, the HCP system or the sports or the wider SEND systems in school. If you're out of school, if you've elected to have your child educated at home, then there is a cost to these virtual platforms, whoever provides them.
And how important is personalization regarding this type of system? What kind of personalization does, for example, Nisai use?
Yeah, okay. So again, I'm going to make it very clear that Nisai's focus is on children with special educational needs in the UK. So the level of personalization is very high. So to describe that, we would call it adaptive teaching or an adaptive environment. So to describe that, even the way that children and young people access the platform, their classroom with their peers, is adapted per child. So whether they want to have the camera on, off, how they want to communicate, all that is adapted. The lesson content is adapted per child. The tasks are adapted as well. We follow a system, a model called Universal Design for Learning, which actually enables the teachers to create, if you like, a map of each child. And so that every interaction that they have on the platform in their group of maybe 8, the teacher is taking into account how the young person accesses it, what the content is, how the content is delivered, and then how the formative assessment is undertaken. And that's why they're successful. And there's the quality mark for online education from the government, which is done by Ofsted, which is the Online Education Quality Mark OEAS. So there's a standard, and that's something for parents or commissioners, the local authorities and schools who look at as, if you like, a trust mark. It's no full Ofsted inspection, but it's based on Ofsted inspections, and it lets you know that there's a high quality of learning and teaching.
And what type of courses can these young people take?
So a vast majority of providers, and Nisai Group included, will be doing GCSEs and A levels. The Key Stage 4 is just as you would expect, plus all the support around literacy and numeracy, if that's what you needed. So if there's additional foundational work that needs to be done around your number and your reading and so on and so forth, then that will be put in place as well. Nisai Group, for instance, and other providers will also be providing pastoral care. They'll be providing your PSHE, your personal sexual health education, and careers guidance. So again, if you're looking for a really good provider to work with your children and your young people, it's about having a provider that doesn't take opportunity away, just provides it in a different way, and seeing it in that way is really, really important.
One of the big problems regarding special educational needs is ensuring that people actually get jobs. Only 22% of autistic children going into work actually have full-time jobs. So how can you ensure that your system, the online learning system, can help break down the barriers? Because after all, that's what education is about. It's about helping children to have the life that they deserve to lead, whether they have special educational needs or not.
We can do everything we can to get them to college or university. But as with all of these things within the system, what currently happens, and I used to get this when I was a head teacher and when I ran groups of schools, it's the drop off at 18 or 24, because how far the wider employment and training system is able to provide that support is actually the issue. Maybe you're asking the question, okay, how can we use virtual education, virtual platforms to help provide ongoing training and support? Yes, I think that is the right question. I don't think we use it at the moment in the way that perhaps we would want to. There is no reason why a virtual college or a virtual provider couldn't continue working with a person with learning difficult all the way through to them being 30 plus and providing wraparound and input. I keep going to East Asia because we've done quite a lot of work out there. If you were in, say, Indonesia, where there's 1,000 islands and it's complex in terms of delivering training, they use virtual systems because they have to. They've made that choice. It allows them to provide effective training and ongoing support for young people. We would have to do the same.
How do we change online education and make it more part of just normal education as opposed to being something that's othered or special or different?
I'll point you to the US and I'll point to Florida in the first instance. Florida is an interesting case in that it's got the highest percentage of children and young people who are educated online in the world. So over 30% of children and young people in Florida are educated online, to this point where the state itself has its own online school. Okay. And they seem to be doing jolly well, thank you very much. Okay. And they have online universities. This system has grown up in Florida in particular because they were seeking, I guess, to let 1,000 flowers blossom. And this was just one that happened to blossom more. And there's also a sense that parents are looking for quite individual programs for their children. That's an example of how culturally a state has taken a different perception of it. Okay, so you were talking about why are we othering it? Well, that's an example of when it doesn't get othered, and I think it's really, really potent. The same way there was work in Canada at the end of the COVID period, where a lot of the children and young people who had learning difficulties had actually really enjoyed online education because they felt they got more out of it actually than going to school, and the state there allowed them to stay. And again, that was provided centrally by the authorities of Toronto and has continued ever since. So what we're saying here, this seems or feels to be an issue about the state itself accepting the place of online education and not feeling that it is other than part of the wider system itself.
You mentioned COVID. Coming back to that, obviously we are on Zoom ourselves, Zoom really, and Teams. They didn't exist massively before the COVID pandemic. So how did COVID-19 normalize online learning, and has that continued apace, or have people stepped back and gone, well, that was just for a different time?
I think that the experience of schools and teachers around online education was not good. And that's not anything to do with the teachers or the children. It was just an awful experience because it had to be set up so very, very quickly for them. There was a series of starts and stops and ins and outs, which made it very, very difficult to get consistency. There were children had a dreadful time because they didn't have connectivity or they weren't able to provide the right kit for the kids. So if you're sat in South London somewhere in a one-bedroom flat with 3 other kids on your iPhone, that's not good virtual learning.
Absolutely not. So what do you think you can do to normalize it going forward? What are your plans?
I think there's a pathway to getting the balance right. Before COVID, if a young person, say, who was on autistic spectrum and really benefited from being online, if they had an element of their program was delivered remotely from a virtual school or virtual platform, then that was counted as educated otherwise. Yeah, so it was an attendance tick. They were at school just online for that day. And that's really, really cool. And then they might come in the next day, whatever. The change to the attendance codes post-COVID is that even if a child is receiving education online, yeah, that no longer counts as an attendance, but they're receiving education. So it just accounts they are absent, although they're doing something that's really, really important to them. The quality of your online learning is actually all about the quality of your staff team and their training and where they are. And this is quite interesting because all of the teachers actually go to the same place every day. They're not all sat at home. So it's a sense that they all go to their virtual school every day and the kids all come in as well. So it's quite an interesting one to visit because it looks a bit like, I don't know, a telesales centre or something, but lots and lots of teachers all in one place, all learning together as you would do in a school. But coming back to your COVID-19 point, I do think that there is still a job to do about changing and reframing the discussion with schools and local authorities and government about the value of online education and the quality. And again, I come back to the OEAS. I actually think it's a really important thing, this quality mark, because then at least parents, schools, local authorities have got a measure of the quality of what is being provided and that it meets a standard. I think there has to be a discussion about why it is an inclusive, socially inclusive tool rather than an exclusive one. I think we have to have a discussion that goes, online learning is actually a pathway back into relationships, back into society. It's a pathway to examination results. It's a pathway to accreditation and to hopefully to training in college. So let's not say once you're on that path, that's the path you're always going to be on. Let's say, okay, this is enabling you to get more confidence, more skills, more examination, more accreditation, and get you to the place where you'll be in society again. You'll be working. You'll be in college. You'll be with your friends. This is, I think, the better way to view virtual learning.
And just taking the opposite view, just for a quick second. So someone said to you that the biggest barrier many young people have isn't access to content, but it's enforced discipline and human support, whilst dumping them in front of a screen is just often polite abandonment. What would you say to them?
I think the first thing I'd say to them is I would agree that there should be no dumping of any child in front of any screen. The second thing that I would say is I'm not quite sure how much children need enforced discipline. I think what really matters is self-discipline and a will to learn and a will to grow. If we are structuring virtual learning, online learning in such a way as its objective is to reintegrate children, to be with their friends, to be in work, to be in employment, to be in training, and we think about our children in the long term, and all of those of us with kids, we have to play the long game with our children. Yeah, we have to think about the people that we want them to be. Then that stops these knee-jerk reactions around things like virtual education. What we should be asking is, what do you want for that child? What do you want for that young person when they're 24? What skills, attributes, and knowledge do they need to have?
Thank you for coming on the show today, Paul. For many families and educators listening, online learning isn't an abstract policy discussion. It is personal, and it is shown to be the lifeline that often keeps children engaged and on the path to leading their best life. So wherever you're coming from, I hope today's conversation has left you feeling inspired and better informed and equipped with some ideas about how to help your children. And on that, thank you to Paul for coming on. Thank you to the viewers who hopefully enjoyed the show as much as we've enjoyed making it. If you have any questions regarding the podcast, please feel free to comment. If you think it's worth coming back, please like and subscribe. More the merrier, as always. And on that note, I'll see you next time. Hope you have a good week, one and all.